to the CDG BizCast. I'm your host, Christian Gonzalez, co-owner of Creativity Design Group, a digital marketing firm in Houston, Texas. In today's episode, we discuss the importance of making a stellar impact when conducting a presentation amongst large crowds. Many presentations fail for many reasons, and to be blunt, it's because both the presenter and their presentations fail to capture their audience. Don't create another presentation that your audience will forget about the moment it's over. Make sure that your presentation has a major impact on them upon conclusion. Kris Flegg, the owner of Presentation Design Co., based out of Pyrmont, New South Wales, Australia, joins us to speak about some of these issues, which he will be addressing in his upcoming book, The Presentation Playbook. He will also share with us his wonderful story about his journey into the wonderful world of entrepreneurship. Also joining me today is Swale Finley, the owner of the Houston area interior and exterior painting from Swale Interiors. He joins us today to discuss some examples of presentations he has done in the past that made his audiences wanting more. Welcome, Kris and Swale. It's a pleasure to have you both on BizCast today.
Thanks for the introduction, Christian, and hi, Swale. Really look forward to talking to you today.
Greetings, Kris. Look forward to meeting you and speaking with you today.
Yes, hello to both of you. It's a pleasure to have y'all both on the show today. Once again, let's start off with our first question. So, Kris, please tell us about how your career started and how it led up to your entrepreneurial beginnings.
Thanks, Christian. Like most people in business, it wasn't a linear path of really planning things out and starting business on the back of that. I didn't originally work in presentations as a business. My original career was in banking. So presentations were part of the role. We were in the sales team. And so we would go through the process of presenting to groups externally, to clients and potential clients. The general process of that would be marketing would give us a sales deck to go out and present with. We'd go through the motions and just I was doing the same thing as everything else. It wasn't a great bar. Most presentations were pretty average, but that was just a part of what we did and how we went about things. So I did that for quite a while. And I really started to become disenchanted with the impact that I was making. We would turn up at a conference and we'd talk, but I didn't really think I was changing anything, and I really wasn't happy with how I was doing. It wasn't until one afternoon at a conference, I was up to slide number 32, and I just had that moment, that light bulb moment where I thought, I'm really tired of doing things in this way and just getting average results. So I was hopelessly an average presenter. So at that moment at the conference, I just made the decision to get better at doing it. So I spent a couple of years reading books, learning, practicing, trying, and I probably moved from average to slightly above average. But it wasn't until I really left banking and started to try to pitch a startup that things changed for me. So rather than working for a company and going through the motions, the stakes changed dramatically when it was my own idea and my own business. And really, it was a moment of truth of, could I make things work? I really needed to make things work. Now, people liked the pitch more than they actually did the idea. And so at that time as well of presenting, when I was working on the startup, I had friends from sort of financial services and banking that were looking for help with presentations. So they would reach out and help, and I was working with that at the same time. But what I really enjoyed was the experience of helping people present better, working behind the scenes with the presenters. And that was the genesis of what we do today as Presentation Design Co. So we started the business 12 years ago, and we've sort of grown over that time now to be award-winning design agency. And we work with local international clients when it really matters, when the presentation is important. We help them cut through and make an impact when they present.
Very interesting. It certainly is a very unique business concept that you came up with. Based on what I learned in school years ago, the professor gave this definition of entrepreneurship, and it was identifying a problem, finding out how to solve that problem, and then turning your solution into a business concept. And that's exactly what you did here. You've noticed that presentations in general are often never prepared properly. They fail to make an impact. So you decided you wanted to start a business focused on helping people make their presentations impactful. So that way, when they're doing a sales pitch or something similar along those lines, they're able to capture the attention and make it memorable to everybody that's in the audience. I'm going to be honest with you. When I read your book and you started talking about where presentations fail, it took me all the way back at least a decade ago to when I was in high school, and I was in these boring lecture classes where all we did was sit there and take notes. There was no impact at all because it was just basically trying to cram a bunch of slides, a bunch of really boring design slides, mind you, trying to memorize the content of them so I could take a test over them later. And then when I got to college, not too long after that, I noticed that there were two types of classes. There were classes where they were just strictly strictly lecture, and then there were those that had the practical portion. I'm a hands-on learner. It was always hard for me to learn in classes that were all strictly lecture, and that was something I learned back from when I was in high school. Like I said, just sitting in classes where the teacher's lecturing and we just have to take notes and memorize everything just wasn't doing it for me. I wasn't learning. But when I took classes later on in college that had a practical portion over what to do, for example, learning how to use Photoshop or build a website with WordPress. It's two things I do every day here at Creativity Design Group. That's where my career pretty much began, because I knew that I was learning from a hands-on approach versus a, sit back and listen approach. I'm a hands-on learner. Some people are visual learners. Some people learn by listening. My learning style is a combination of practical and visual learning, but I could never learn just by sitting and listening. And frankly, your book explains why simply trying to listen to someone lecture isn't always effective. If someone goes out there and presents, they bring something engaging to their presentation that gets the audience active and involved, it makes a world of a difference.
Absolutely. If we think about presentations, when we give a presentation, we're looking for some change in the world. If we think about in business, we're looking to people to do something differently, to think something differently, to maybe stop doing something. And so the starting point of all presentations is really understanding what's the change you'd like to take place in the world and making that happen. When it comes to present, there's an exchange there. You're asking your audience to sit down, stop and pay attention to you, and hopefully you're going to give them some value. And what we call that is the exchange. Like, the audience is going to give you their attention, and exchange, you're looking to create some value for them. Now, unfortunately, in most presentations, that exchange isn't fair. People haven't thought about that concept. And so that's why most presentations fail. They don't really fail in a dramatic way in terms of throwing rocks at the presenter and booing, but they just fail to make that desired impact. And that's what we work with people every day, trying to help them cut through and make that impact, because we've all been there with presentations, both as audience members, as presenters, when things haven't gone all okay. But focusing on that value that you create for your audience and making that exchange fair is really one of the principles of a great presenter.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. After I got to know you, your book, and your company, I have certainly felt that any professional out there, whether they be a business owner or they work in the corporate world, they all need to read your book or get to know you and your company, especially if they're going to be doing it regularly. I mean, it's just so important to make that impact.
Yes, to both of you guys. Christian, what you had brought up about what is the way people learn and how do we really communicate with people? And the three modes of communication is auditory, visual, and tactical. And so what I learned early on in being an entrepreneur and being a business owner now for over 40 years, and I've actually set up now 5 different businesses through the years. What I learned is learning to communicate right off the bat with my client, whether I was just working with several people or if I was giving a lecture to 30 to 50 people or maybe even 100. I learned early on, for me, if I lectured for just a short period of time and then opened up the room to questions and have people ask questions, and then I would immediately be able to respond and make it appropriate for the venue and the group that I was talking with. That always seemed to have the biggest impact versus just presentation slides. Kris, when you said, I'm already at slide 32, and you probably were looking out at the audience and you knew you were losing some of them, at least visually. But anyway, yes, it's learning to communicate with your people and listen to the client that you're speaking with.
That's a great observation, Smile. And when it comes to the world of presentations, if we think about why things fail, there's probably 3 things that come down into there in terms of why things fail. And one of those is we don't usually have a reliable framework. When it comes to presenting, we call them moments of truth. The idea that you're going to go up in a live environment and present to a group of people and you're going to be judged for that, and that is a moment of truth. We don't always have a reliable framework to follow. We may have done some training or had a tip or gone to YouTube and looked at a TED talk. So most of us don't have a reliable framework to follow. So that's where things start to go wrong. We don't really know what to do in a clear and concise framework. The second thing is we perpetually shorten time. So in the process of creating a presentation, we kind of skip the thinking about our audience. We skip some of the deeper level reflection and start to dump content on slides. We think of PowerPoint as the presentation or Google Slides. We put our content into slides. And the third thing that that leads to failure is that we don't prepare enough. So we don't work on our delivery in terms of understanding the audience, in terms of preparation, and end up reading off slides. And we all kind of know how that goes. And that's what we see so much today in business, in schools, the fact that people are looking and skipping those steps or going through those same steps. And when it comes to your audience, if we think about what's changed over the last 10, 15 years, that the amount of information that we have out there is too much. There's a war for your audience's attention. We're bombarded with new information every day. We have a lot to be able to consume, and we become very good in our selective attention. So we only really start to pay attention to things that are interesting, and that filter that we've got to shut off, it's very well practiced. So when it comes to a presentation, on a Tuesday afternoon, and your proposition is someone's going to listen to you speak off your slides for 30 minutes, it's not a pretty attractive proposition for your audience members. So they're coming into a presentation already with that bias. And as a great presenter, it's understanding that you're in a war for your audience's attention, and it's up to you to make that exchange fair, and it's up to you to make an impact and to be engaging. Because if people aren't engaged, you've lost them to begin with. There's no change that's going to happen unless your audience is first engaged.
Yes, that's exactly right. Engagement is definitely key when it comes to having a captivating presentation. I've been to many seminars during my time as an entrepreneur, and one thing I notice in a lot of these seminars is that some of them have an engaging aspect to it, to where they ask us to maybe pull up a video on our phones or have us look something up about ourselves. That way we can apply it to the information that they're talking about, whatever the subject at hand is. It's always important to have something in the presentation that keeps the audience engaged in a way, that they're actually interacting with your presentation. They're interacting with the content, and you're giving them instructions on how to do something. Basically, giving them an activity that keeps them interested versus having them sit there idly listening to you talk for over 30 minutes to an hour or longer. That does not make a good presentation, and that's why people forget. This does lead me into my next question. So, Kris, what was the common problem in the business world that you identified that prompted you to start Presentation Design Co., and how does your company aim to solve those problems for business professionals? You've already kind of touched on this, but please go into more detail about Presentation Design Co. and how the common problem that you've noticed that everyone keeps making when it comes to making a presentation prompted you to jump in and form this wonderful business.
Thanks, Christian. Absolutely. So the thing that we do when it matters is to try and help clients make an impact and make that change possible. Now, the common problem with business is that presentations are really, really important form of communication. So businesses might have great websites, they might have sort of great collateral, but presentations are often a chink in the armor. It's a really important moment of truth. So when businesses go out and to talk to clients, it's a real interaction that's taking place. And they might be great at emails, in terms of communication. They might have great brochures or newsletters. They might have a great website. But if you think about it, the potential for change comes in that presentation. It's really sort of the top of the triangle in terms of the importance for a business. Now, most presenters don't present full time. They're not professional presenters. It's just something that's part of their role they're required to do in their professional life. So they don't often come into this as a person who presents every day and every week. So they're not too sure of what to do. Now, how do we help clients? Well, we help clients in a couple of different ways. Sometimes it's just improving their slides. It might be taking away the pain of PowerPoint and giving them some time back. So they're not stuck at 11 o'clock at night, the night before a presentation, trying to fix the formatting in PowerPoint. PowerPoint can be quite tricky to use. And so on the easy side of things, we polish up presentations for clients. We help them give back their time so they can then focus on thinking about their audience and then the delivery that they're going to take place. So it frees up some of that time in the presentation process. There's other times we work collaboratively with clients on the structure and content, and that's must-win sales presentations or conferences or TED Talks. So we go behind the scenes with clients and we break down the structure, the flow and the content, and then design a presentation for them that really stands out. What we specialize in is what we call tier 1 presentations. That's the top 10% of presentations that are modern, clean, and professional and really kind of stand out to their audience. So we work on over 10,000 slides a year through the team, and we always guarantee two things to clients. We guarantee them the delivery, because presentations often take place with quite tight timeframes, and we guarantee the overall tier 1 quality of what we produce. So we've got an award-winning team that's worked with clients like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Toyota. We've worked with local government and federal government here. And over the last 12 years, we guarantee every single project. But that's what we do as a business. It's also the ethos that I took into starting and running the business came from working in banking. And it's not just what you do, but it's how you do it as well. So we have a really strong focus on communication and client service. Now, in the world of design and design agencies, there's sometimes a bit of a gap between the client needs and how designers work. But I didn't come and start this as a designer. came from this essentially from working professional services. So what we make sure that we do with the team is really understand clients' needs and try and be great at communication. So that's always been a focus that I've led the team through as well. And just this year, we won the 2024 Achievement Award for customer service, which is a great thing for the team as well, because it's not just the project that you work on, but it's how you make the clients feel and the customer experience through that. It's great for the team to be recognized, to be able to see that the work that they put within presentations and the client service aspect has really stood out to clients.
And congratulations on winning the 2024 Achiever Award for your excellence in customer service. That really shows that your company truly does care about making sure that their clients are beyond satisfied. I always say this, they're simply meeting your clients' needs, which to me, I would grade a business with a C minus or so, but when you exceed their needs, you can grade that business with an A plus. Every time you exceed their needs, and it sounds like that y'all go above and beyond every single aspect of the presentation development process. You prepare the clients how to present themselves, and then you also prepare their presentations on their content. You structure out their content. You prepare their presentations for the while by making sure that all aspects are covered, but without providing too much information, because we all know that we only want to present the absolute most important information in a presentation. Otherwise, it's going to be too much of an overload on one's brain, and then they're going to eventually forget. And that's one of the common mistakes that many people make. And y'all work to make sure that that doesn't happen, that their presentations are out there, ready to take on the world, and the audience is leaving wanting more. Now, a lot of the rules that you mentioned about presentations also apply to website design as well. It is important for a website to make an impact the moment people pull it up. There's what we call the 3-second rule in the website world. Within those 3 seconds, first the website does need to load, and then once it comes up, they need to like what they see above the fold. And when it comes to presentations, the same thing matters too. When you're structuring your content, I would presume that you would start with the most important information first, right? Or am I wrong on that? Please correct me.
No, absolutely. So we can think of it two different things, is that in a presentation, we have a primary visual aid, which is the presenter. So often we get caught in thinking that the PowerPoint or the slides are the presentation. But in our world, we say, as a presenter, you are the primary visual aid. So that's the most important thing. When we're working with slides, that's the secondary visual aid. And we only use them when they're going to add value to the presentation. But one thing clients don't feel comfortable with, and most presenters don't feel comfortable with, is that when they do go to present, they are going to be judged. People are going to make an opinion of them. But that opinion happens over a period of time. Like websites that you mentioned, there's initial snap judgment. So do I recognize this person? What do I think of them wearing? What do I think about their saying, their tone of voice? So that's something that we really can't control to a huge amount. People are going to have their automatic default judgments. In a presentation, that's really the first couple of seconds when you start to present. Over the period of the next 7 to kind of 30, 40 seconds is when people will open up and have a more informed judgment. They'll listen to what you say, and then they'll make a more informed, deeper judgment from you. And when you present, that's why the opening of how you present, that first 30 to 40 seconds is really so critical. And opening presentation with a strong start that gives an audience an overview of why they should listen to you and what the value for them is in that exchange is absolutely critical. And that's what we work with clients for quite closely, to make sure the overall presentation makes an impact. But if they start strong in that first 30 to 40 seconds, it gives them a really solid foundation to start working from.
It basically follows the first impressions rule. First impressions always count. So when you start your presentation, you'll want to make sure that you've hooked your audience right then and there, or else the rest of the presentation is most likely not going to capture their attention, and then they're just going to be looking at the clock waiting for time to be up so they can leave. It'll be like in school, we're waiting for the bell to ring, basically.
Absolutely. And the challenge with presentations is that the preparation of presentations are mostly a solo process. We sit behind the laptop by ourselves, we work on the slides, and we sit down and sort of work through those things. And then we have this big transformation when it comes time to present. And that's the challenge that people have, is moving to that live environment and having that moment of truth. Now, one thing that we have seen over time that professional presenters do, and these are people who turn up on a very regular basis, and they're getting paid $5,000 or $10,000 a session. So it's high level presenting. Now, what most people don't know is that those presenters still feel nervous. They might have been presenting for a number of years, be very experienced and have a great reputation, but all presenters still feel nervous. If you're not feeling nervous when you lead up to presenting, there's something wrong, because you should be feeling nervous, and it can be a helpful type of nerves. But one thing that we have seen over time for professional presenters do differently to most regular presenters is this idea of a launch sequence. So rather than being caught up in nerves and think about themselves and sort of stumbling through things, they have a deliberate set of practices that they start the day before and map out that journey from one day before, 6 hours before, 1 hour, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, and right up to the first 10 seconds, and then the first 30 seconds of how they open their presentation. So that launch sequence of premeditated set of actions gives them an enormous sense of control. It helps with the nerves and really sets them up to deliver every single time. And that's something that anyone can do as a presenter. We see it practice in professional presenters, but that idea of a launch sequence, rather than sort of getting caught up in the moment, but write down a deliberate time frame and a set of actions that you'll take right up to that moment of starting. And the first minute of your presentation can be something that you can do very simply and very easy that will create an enormous difference when it's time to present.
That's true. It's important that the people take the preparation process very, very seriously, or else they're just going to be setting themselves up for failure.
Chris, I really liked what you were explaining about setting up a presentation as far as what should I do today in preparation? What do I do 6 hours out, 3 hours out, and then taking it down to the wire. And then one thing that I used to do for myself when I would use that same situation is when I would get ready to step out in front of the audience and start the lecture, I would think in my mind, it's showtime. And there was something that would always be able to trigger off within me. Not only is it showtime, but I got a burst of energy and what I needed to do and present myself in the moment here.
It's showtime. I like that, Swale, because it is a performance in some way. It's not an email. It's not a phone call. It's a live performance. And that energy, the transference of energy to your audience is a really important factor. And thinking about these things consciously in the lead up is something that we can all do and will help sort of make a difference on the day. We all have this feeling, we can't talk about presentations without talking about feeling nervous. I've mentioned before this idea that we are going to be judged. People are going to be making judgments for that. One thing that we like to think of is that when it comes time to present is the idea of a presentation persona. So again, actively thinking through that delivery, because it's not yourself on a phone call or it's not yourself on a Zoom call. It's looking to capture audience's attention. And that's 20% more energy, 20% more gestures, being 20% more louder, but making that presentation persona. So when you come to present, you can comfortably step into that and you know where you're going to hit in that level of energy.
Absolutely, Chris. You guys right on target with your book and your presentation and your philosophy. I learned a lot when I was able to read over your book.
Thanks, Wale. And that's what, when we think about presentations, and most people don't have a reliable framework, we're not talking presentation tips here in terms of a tactical level. What I'd encourage people to do is think about the presentation mindset. So the great presentation starts with a mindset of a couple of different things. And we can look at different fonts. There's so many tips and tricks out there as well that can confuse people. But the foundation of a great presentation that cuts through and makes an impact starts with how we think about the task. And that can be applied across different businesses, across different arenas as well. But it's the task of thinking about the presentation. That's what we've really seen over the past 10 years is how great people do it. And that's the genesis of the book, trying to break down a mindset that people can incorporate. If it's an experienced presenter and you're feeling okay, but you'd like to do better, it might be thinking about just a couple of areas to improve. But if you're a younger presenter, it's giving a reliable framework, the way to think about the task of presenting that we're hoping you'll be able to share from the experiences that we've seen that anyone can take on board. And the great thing is you can start this with your next presentation. Now, if we think about the overall state of presentations, we said and sort of acknowledge that most presentations fail. Getting good at presentations has enormous success. It will help you in your professional role, with your career. If it's in business, it's going to help you develop the business. It really can be a superpower that people can work on, develop, and anyone can do it. It's the idea that we don't need to be a TED Talk each time. We're not always talking to 10,000 people at a time. Even if it's a small group or presentations are a part of your role, part-time but not full-time, focusing on becoming a great presenter has enormous benefits, and thinking about it as a superpower that you can do to stand out, because not everyone's doing a great job at this. You can start to make incremental changes and start to enjoy that and start to stand out very simply in your next presentation.
Absolutely.
And Chris, you lead me into my next question. We touched on it earlier, but where are presenters failing when it comes to creating a captivating presentation? What are some of the most common mistakes made that cause the majority of these presentations to fail?
Absolutely. Took a bit of time reflecting on it. So years ago, I started thinking about, well, what are the common things across all different types of presentations that stood out to us? We have this great experience of working behind the scenes with clients and helping them presentations, and everyone's presentation situation is different. But I started to think about, well, what are the commonalities? And that really came down to 5 different things. And they really start off with what goes wrong. And I think the first thing that goes wrong is that most presenters are focusing on themselves and not the audience. The idea, as I mentioned, that presentations are a solo process. We think about what we want to tell people, what we want from them, what are we going to say? But really, to make an a great effective presentation that cuts through is thinking number one as the audience is number one. That's the most important thing. Your job as a presenter is to turn up and be there for your audience. The term that we use for that is being a humble servant. And some people maybe not connect with that straight away. The idea of being a humble servant is the role of yourself as a presenter is to be able to understand the problems of the people that you're speaking to, be able to show that you can solve them, and be able to prove that. And all along the way, not assuming anything about that. As well as you mentioned before, talking to your audience, researching, understanding their needs, and showing that you can solve them is really that mindset that we do. So we do want something from people when we present. We might want to sell them something. We might want to be able to change their minds or inform them. But thinking about how we can be and turn up on that day for them is probably the number one thing that we'd recommend. And that comes from the idea is the opponent to that is that most presentations are self-serving. You can tell that from a presenter that they're there to talk to you about something. They want something from you, but they're not making that exchange fair. The next thing we have as a problem of failure is that most presentations can be a content dump. You mentioned that before, Christian, back to the days of lectures. And in business, we've seen that so many times when people just get up and give us a lot of content and slides and expect something from us. That doesn't really work that way as well. So a great presentation, rather than just being a content dump, it starts with a singular focus. What would you like to change as a result of your presentation? What would take place? Or what wouldn't take place if you didn't present that day? So starting a presentation with a clear, singular objective of what you'd like to take place and knowing the 3 to 5 steps that you put in place in your presentation to get there is absolutely essential. The third thing that I think of is that in a presentation, people don't know how to turn up. And we touch on this idea of the persona, but the idea when it comes to present, it's authenticity. That people do need to connect to yourself as a human to feel engaged. They don't want you to stand up there and read off slides or pretend to be someone else or mismatched energy in the room. So being authentically yourself, even when you feel nervous, even if you don't feel confident, is really important. When it comes to present and being authentic, that really comes down to being brave. Meet the audience where they are, be bold and be yourself. You are going to need to be 20% louder, 20% more expressive, but letting people connect with the authentic version of yourself is something that does create an enormous amount of change. The other thing to expand on there for Christian is no one cares what you're presenting to as much as you do. Often in a presentation, we can have a presenter. Again, it really comes back down to that idea of being a self-serving exercise, but people assume that we know things in a presentation already. We assume people care as much about what we're saying, but a great starting point is to assume apathy and to think that the audience you're speaking to doesn't care as much as you do. Your job is to be interesting and engaging to make them care. And that's introducing elements into your presentation, like Swale mentioned, about making them interactive, making them interesting, making them exciting, and be great at communicating and breaking down things so they're not overcomplicated. So the idea is no one caring as much as yourself, and your job is there to make them care or make them interested in what you're saying is such a critical mindset of someone that's looking to make a difference in their presentation. And probably the last of the big groups of things of why presentations fail is, as I mentioned, we're short on time perpetually. We tend to rush things, and so we don't do the job to really think through and prepare. And that preparation can be about setting up the technical aspects of the day. We've all seen a presentation that starts off with the slides not working or a technical problem and lots of excuses. It's not a strong start, and things don't tend to end too well when it starts off like that. But another idea is thinking about over that period that you've got to present, just say it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, thinking about the energy levels that you have over that time. I started in banking, so I love graphs. And so the idea, if you are going to present over, say, a 30-minute period, take a bit of a moment and think about that 30-minute time period that you have and how will you create and modulate the energy when you present. Most presentations start off okay. There's an introduction and things are okay at that time as well. There is some sort of sense of connection, but then they tend to drop off as we start going through more slides and more content and pick up a little bit at the end when the audience feels like they've got a chance to get out there and that the door is not far away. So thinking over a 30-minute period of time of introducing stories, introducing some level of activity, engagement, or asking questions, and having those as pre-planned or pre-purposed things that you'll do tactically in that presentation to modulate the energy over that 30-minute period is really absolutely essential. It's what we see great presenters do, planning out the time they have, thinking about their audience, and really sort of going deep in thinking about the energy of the audience at that time and moving things around to keep it interesting and engaging.
To sum everything up in one sentence, the reason why presentations fail is because too many of them require the audience to be stationary, meaning that it's just the presenter talking, there's no engagement, they're not asking people in the audience to perform any activities, they're just sitting there and listening, and they just get tired. They get tired out from sitting there, and they just just want to get up and leave. Like I said earlier, it's like waiting for the bell to ring to go home, like you're in school. And that's how I see it. I've been in that situation myself many times when sitting in presentations, not exactly in school, but just in general, whenever I attended certain seminars and things like that. The engaging aspect was almost never there. It was always just a presenter talking. Now, I kind of want to shift the focus for a second here to websites, because I notice that a lot of websites also break these rules as well. When you're in business, it should always be about what the customer wants, what they're looking for, and how you can solve their problems. And it should also answer the question over why they should choose your company over a competitor's. Now, in the web design world, and this is especially true for designers who work with Squarespace, another content management platform that's popular, it's similar to WordPress. A lot of them make websites for their businesses that specialize in Squarespace design, but they do not talk about why their company is the right choice up front. Instead, their homepage and their about page is all me, talking about the owner, talking about their personal life and what they like to do in their spare time. And I've said time and time again, none of that is important when you're trying to build up a business. When you have customers looking for a firm to perform whichever tasks they're looking to get done, let's say they're looking not necessarily for a web design firm, but maybe they're looking for a plumber or an electrician, they want to know if you're the right person to hire. They don't care at all about your personal life. And this goes back to what you were saying. Nobody cares about your presentation as much as you do yourself. And too many business owners have this in mind. If it's not on their website, it's on their social media. Too many people like to commingle personal and business when it comes to social media. And we did a whole episode talking about that back in 2022. It's important to make sure that you are focused on the customer's needs, show them why your company is the right choice, show examples, show some social proof, you have testimonials or Google reviews, but don't make it about yourself. To me, that's being very, very selfish. It's showing that you're extremely conceited when you make it all about yourself. It shows that you're conceited whenever you're just tailoring your number one most important marketing tool and making it about yourself rather than about your clients and their needs. I just wanted to bring that in there because I was able to take some of the rules that you mentioned, Kris, and apply it to website design.
That's such a great observation, Christian, as well, that we think about it all starts with that mindset. And in the world of websites, the idea if you haven't got the right mindset and that you've created a website, people will just move on. They won't read and they'll look at a different website and potentially work with a competitor. The mindset of a presentation, if we get that right and we follow that as well, the drop off in a presentation can just be people giving you silent opposition, sitting there, hoping to get out, waiting for the bell to ring. The idea is that if we can start working on these things, we feel the difference. We can feel when people are there to be able to help us and serve our needs and solve our problems. And whilst there's different technical aspects to a website or presentation, that starting point of the mindset is something that will travel all its way through. And the great thing about that, it's just changing how we think to a different way, but it has an enormous impact if we do it well.
I need to ask you, when did you start this particular business? When did you launch this business?
Thanks, Whale. It was about 12 years ago. So in that process of pitching a startup and working with people unofficially, that's when I just made the decision to specialize in presentations. So that was just myself at the time. So like most businesses that start, you're doing all of the different operations in areas yourself. But over time, we grew to a team. So we have a team of 9 these days as well, too. So we've got world-class presentation designers on part of our team. We've all worked together for a very long time and specialized in presentations. And so over the course of the past 12 years, we've worked with over 1,000 different sort of projects and clients. We create over 10,000 slides a year. So we've got a really unique aspect in presentations because we work with government, business, and in all types of different types of presentations as well too. So it gives us an idea of seeing the many and what works universally in presentations as well. But what's changed from the past 12 years? Well, not that much. Some of the technology has changed, but most people and businesses are still struggling with these fundamental problems. And from what we see in working with clients is that dramatic transformation of doing it well. The impact that it has of feeling great about how you present, being successful in the business, whether it's a sales presentation or being a leader and talking to your team. It's the form of communication that if you really focus in on can have such a great tangible difference.
Also, Kris, I wanted to ask you, here in the United States, when people are looking to hire someone, whether it's a house painter, a plumber, or somebody in your field that you're in, one of the biggest factors that they look for is that company's review. What type of testimonial is out there in the marketplace? And they usually do their research before they ever make that first phone call to call your office. Now, in Australia, do you find that's the case there? I just don't know about marketing there in Australia versus the US.
Absolutely. Over 80% of what we do is with existing clients and referrals. So for us, reputation is number one. So it's a very specialized field that we work in. And so our reputations are important. And we look to keep that consistent over a really long period of time, which can be a challenge to do, especially in the world that we work in, very tight turnarounds, working often with sort of complex needs and complex clients. It's what we really focus, as I mentioned before, is really the client service aspect and delivery. So in looking for new team members, I'm looking for talented people that have great technical skills, but also great at talking to people. So, and that's a process that we go through and looking for the right people and then sort of train them over time. But yeah, absolutely. Coming back to reviews. Now, if we think about different businesses that we have, there's not a lot of people that do what we do. And most people are working with us and outsourcing their presentations for the first time. So the two things that we're really looking to do is to give lots of examples to let people know what a great presentation looks like. If you've been stuck in the corporate world for a year, you're used to seeing some pretty awful slides and it's hard to reimagine them as something different. So one thing that we do is look to provide clients with lots of different examples and case studies. So that's stories of where we've worked with previous clients. And we love to show the before and afters as well, what came in through the door and what sort of came out at the end. And so that sort of builds up a picture in the client's mind of what's possible for them. Then absolutely it's reviews. So we've kept consistently 5-star Google reviews over time. And that's from the work that we do with clients and making sure that we work on both the output, but the client experience through that process as well.
Incredible, Kris. But yes, getting back to the review situation with my painting company, we have a company here that does nationwide promotion and advertising called Angie or Angie's List. And I always had over 85 stars with that particular company. And so that's really helped out when people would go shopping before they would ever call my company. They would see the track record that the company has before they ever made that first phone call. And it sounds like through the years of the last 12 years for you, your company has grown and been able to expand tremendously, height and breadth, as far as what you guys are able to do and what you bring to the marketing table.
Absolutely. And well done. So anyone that operates in business, we know keeping that level of consistency over time, it can be a great challenge. Sounds like you have done very well for yourself, Swain, in being able to keep that such a high level for a period of time. And it comes back down to, again, also maybe the mindset we have about presentations is the mindset we have in delivering value for clients.
Yes.
Every business owner should aim to keep their client's best interest in mind. Like I said, that's why your website needs to show that you care about client success, that you care about client satisfaction. You should never use your website just to brag about yourself like a lot of these designers I mentioned do. It has to be client focused. And like I said, a C grade company is one that only meets their expectations. An A plus company is one that exceeds their expectations. And when it comes to reviews, it is very important to make sure you have 5-star reviews on Google Maps because these do count towards your SEO as well as your responses. Google does like to see businesses who respond to every review, whether it's a 5-star or a 1-star, but that is the first contact point many customers will see whenever they're searching for a company on Google Maps. They are going to look at reviews. They are going to take those into account first. They see that you have a lot of 5 stars. It's going to be a lot easier to get a phone call from new clients. But if you have a mixed bag of reviews, there's a 50-50 chance that you may or may not get a client. And if your company is loaded with 1 or 2-star reviews, you're going to end up going out of business pretty soon. Kris, my next question for you is, can you please share with us an example of a presentation that follows the 5 power principles described in your book and why it was successful? And please cover the 5 power principles for those who are not familiar with them.
Thanks, Christian. If it's okay, I'd love to share 2 stories. One is a story of success that comes from humility, and the second is a story of not being successful and failing that comes from overconfidence. And I might start with the story about being overconfident. It was about 5 or 6 years ago. We were working with a really experienced team from a multinational company. They'd been invited to present back to another large Australian company about delivering a complex service and training offering. Now, the team has presented regularly. They knew what they were talking about, and they came into the project looking for some help with the design of what they were presenting to, and they were really confident in how they would approach the task. But the problem is they were overconfident. So when it came with working with them, we had a pretty short time frame. They were looking to do some really technical things in their presentation, and they wanted to impress the audience. They were confident with how they deliver, but they didn't really put the time in to practice. So what happened over a course of a few days, we worked quite intensely with the team, created something that was amazing, but the team was so confident in their ability to present at that stage as well that they didn't take the time to kind of relearn the presentation as we built it. So we'd followed everything they'd asked for. We'd worked very closely with them as well. Came to the day, had the presentation, went off to present to the client, thinking everything was being okay, but they hadn't done the work in preparation. Followed up with with them in the afternoon to find out how they went. And it didn't go really well. There was a huge amount of technical problems at the start of the presentation. They hadn't, as a group, presented together and practiced. So they'd stumbled the way through it. They didn't work well with the remote clicker. Things went backwards. Things went forward. The animation didn't work as they expected it to. So in the weeks that followed from there, they waited for a response from the client, and the response was negative. They didn't win the deal. And the particular feedback that they got was saying, if you were going to come and present with us, make sure that you know your stuff first. And so it was a great example of crushing failure, but coming from overconfident, and for presenters who presented all the time, still skipping the step of preparation. They thought they did great, didn't work great, and had enormous cost for them because they lost the deal. And they were particularly called out in not preparing and making it really sort of quite a fumbled process through the day. So it was that idea of going, you can have the greatest slides and the greatest team, but every presentation does need the work to over-deliver, taking into account things that might go wrong and having an answer and being prepared to work with those. So that's a story about when things didn't work. And that comes from overconfidence, which quite a few people still have, but keeping in mindset that every presentation is a moment of truth and you need to deliver every time. Even if you presented before, get ready for the things that go wrong and be prepared to answer them. And especially if you're working with a group, make sure you've done the work in how you'll exchange with each other, the energy that you'll have, and the format and agenda that you'll follow through. So that's a story about things not working. But one of the greatest stories, and it's one of the ones I've got in the book, is working with a plumber. So this was a gentleman who started off a plumbing business by himself. He grew it over time, again, using a lot of the principles that we've spoken about today about delivering value for clients. And, over the course of 15 years, developed into a business with about 100 staff. And he was working on major projects of his business of things like airports and commercial buildings. So one day I had a call saying, "Hey, do you work with plumbers?" And I went, "Okay, we haven't, but happy to have a chat." So he was quite the gentleman who started the business because he started the business by himself. He'd worked very, very hard, developed the team, and he's very close to the whole team and what they did. And it was really important to him. He wasn't used to presenting. Formal presentations weren't part of the role, but then he invited to speak to a really large company about becoming a preferred supplier to them. So this was a make or break. It was such a critical presentation to his business and a real sort of transformation that could take place if they won. Now, he wasn't overconfident. He was very, very humble in knowing that he wasn't good at doing this, and that's why he reached out for us for help. So we worked with him over the course of a couple of weeks in preparing the presentation, and he was great at asking questions. Even though he was really successful in what he did, great at his business, he was very open to learning and very humble in his approach. So in those presentations of a small business talking to a larger business, a lot of people like to hype themselves up, to be overconfident, to be able to sort of go in and tell the world why they're so great. But when you're presenting to that C-level at executive, they kind of know you already. That's why you've got the invitation. It's not really the energy that they're looking for. They're looking to understand you a little bit more and create that sense of connection. So their attention, is very sparing. They're not really prepared to put up too much, and they're not going to sit there for 20 minutes as you read off some slides. So in the opening of the presentation, which is a bit that we've covered before, it's essential to get that first 30 seconds, 60 seconds great. And this gentleman could have gone in and told stories about how great that he was. He could have gone in and listed out numbers and facts and figures, all these different things that we know that just wouldn't work. So in the conversation that we had with him, we asked him why was this important presentation talking to his company. And he gave us the story about 20 years ago when he was still learning to become a plumber. He would see the buildings that they were making. He would see their flags on top of the buildings. And he set himself the goal of one day working with them, working on projects like that, which was a big leap at the time considering where he was. So we thought it was a fantastic story, and that would be quite relatable, and it would be the authentic version of himself. So that was what we sort of packaged up at the start of the presentation. Rather than facts or figures or any sort of great level of detail, he started off with a story about what that day meant to him, having the opportunity to present to them. The fact that, and he could point to one of the buildings that he'd driven past that were in the CBD, and he shared with them the privilege that he had in talking to them. It was a reflection of his own career of how far he came to work from essentially being a solo plumber to building a successful business and being able to present to this company at the day. And it was really a story of the journey and development of his professional business and what that meant to him. And that was a great start. So it started off with a really heartfelt story about why that was important to him and therefore what he was aspiring to do in working with them. That was great. So he had lots of different approaches, but that was the start of his presentation. And the rest of his presentations went through how he would do that, why he would do that better than someone else, and previous projects that he worked on that proved that he had the capability within his team to deliver on that. He called us up that afternoon and said it was done. It was fantastic. He felt great at the presentation. And it was only just a few minutes into the presentation as well that he felt that it was going to be successful. And he had confirmation before he left the room that the deal was done and he'd be working with that company. So that's two different stories. One of a professional team that were overconfident and failed to deliver, and And the second story about coming to it with humility, being open-minded and thinking about what it takes to connect with an audience to start off with, but still following the steps of preparing the structure and flow of what you talk to address the things that you need to do in a presentation, but the success that you can have in just thinking about the task in a different way.
Yes, these are some great examples. Overconfidence can be very dangerous. Too many people feel that they can just wing things. That's a major problem. It's a major toxic mindset that people have. People have this misconception. Their mind has been poisoned for some reason to believing that they can just go out there and wing it without any practice, without any preparation. They may not see it at the time, but that's how you open doors for failure. Now, can you please cover the 5 power principles described in your book and how they apply to presentation?
Absolutely. And when we share the principles, they address the 5 things where we see most presentations fail. And some people might be great at some things and have room for improvement in others, or other people might be looking for a new framework to follow. So in the book, I've tried to make them very simple and relatable. And the idea is thinking and reflecting of these things as a mindset and just incorporating and maybe focusing on one of these for your next presentation and testing and learn and using an iterative approach to develop your presentation skills. The first thing, the number one principle is the audience is number one. So whenever you approach the task of the presentation, taking on the mindset of yourself as a humble servant, you're there to meet the needs of your audience. So we know how it goes when people are a self-serving presenter, but that role of being a humble servant really comes from research and understanding your audience, showing that you can solve their problems and proving that you can. The second thing is starting with the end in mind. Rather than the content dump, working out the singular objective that you have in your presentation. What's the change you'd like to take place in the world? And defining the 3 to 5 steps or the chunks of content that will take to get there. So don't open PowerPoint, don't start out putting everything down, but starting a presentation with working out the end in mind and the journey that you'll take to get there is essentially making an impact. Defining that singular objective is something that most people struggle with. We've asked people in the process of presentations, what's the most important thing about your presentation? And people can struggle with that over the time. We can get lost in content so easy. We can get lost in slides and formatting and information, but people don't want a content dump. They'd like a structured piece of communication that leads them to thinking about things in a different way. So starting with end of mind and defining the 3 to 5 sort of groups or the journey that you'll take to get there is the start of a great presentation. The third thing is thinking about nerves, but also being authentically you. When it comes time to present, presentations can be a nervous wreck and that can take things over, but it creates a barrier to engagement if people feel that it's not you turning up. So be brave, be bold, meet the audience where you are, and just understand that you are going to be judged, but you've got ability to influence that judgment over the course of your presentation. The best way that you can connect with the audience is being the authentic version of yourself. Now, you don't have to run onto the stage or you don't have to run in your presentation super hyped up with energy and high fives. That's not the presentation style that works within most presentations. But finding a comfortable fit where you feel relaxed, where you feel confident and you feel authentic is going to help you, but it's also going to create that connection with your audience. The fourth thing is assume apathy. No one cares about what you say as much as you do. So make it interesting. Now, when it comes to a corporate presentation that might be full of facts and figures, it's really hard to think about how can we make this stuff interesting. And again, coming back to yourself in that mindset, it's what tools do you have in your toolkit? What do you have at your disposal to make things interesting? And one of the easiest things that you can do is to tell stories. When we talk to engineers in their presentations about telling stories, the barrier comes up straight away because they look at what they talk to and they're logical, technical people. They think that they don't have a story in that. But your whole presentation doesn't have to be a story. It can be the idea of peppering in some stories in your presentation. Now, when it comes to stories, we've all got them. When we work with clients and dig that little bit deeper, we've got great stories. And we think about stories as packaging some of the content that you'd like to talk to, but in an interesting way. Stories can be case studies. So we think about stories, Swale, in your business, in talking to clients as well. You know, clients aren't there just looking for facts and information. They're looking to find out similarities of things that you've done for other people. So we've got the idea of case studies of before and afters of where you've worked with clients in a similar situation are a great way of packaging up services and things you do that make them relatable. We've got other stories about divergent paths. We've got the origin stories. When people are talking to you, they'd like to know who you are and where you've come from. So an origin story of why you've started this business and what's important to you is a great way of packaging content. We've also got a day in the life of, if you're in a corporate world and you're selling a product or service, rather than just initially talking about the details of what you do, telling it as a day in the life of how does someone wake up and use and interact with your service or product every day, and how does it add value to their life is a great way of explaining things. We've all got stories ways and the ability to package up what we'd like to talk to in really interesting ways that really goes over the case of assuming apathy. You're doing the work then to make it interesting for people. And the last thing is about preparing to over-deliver. When we rush on things, we fail to actually go through our content and rehearse and prepare. So thinking about the launch sequence, as I mentioned before, what are the steps that you'll take in leading up to and the start of your presentation? And also planning that energy over the time. Whatever period of time that you've got, making sure that you're thinking about the interaction you have with the audience, putting in things to make it engaging. And if you need to, run short. So most people in a 30-minute presentation will think they need to speak for 30 minutes, but you don't need to. Don't feel like you need to fill up the spot that you're talking to. Feel free to cut things short. One of the most awkward things in a presentation is the question slide at the end. Someone talks for 30 minutes, gives a lot of content, overwhelms the audience, and at the end of it pops up a question slide. Asking questions along the way tactically as you present, especially as if you've gone through technical details or you've gone quite deep into a topic or something that you're talking to, stopping, giving the audience some room to think and asking them a reflective or an open question is a great way to be able to modulate the energy that you have through the presentation and keep people engaged.
Absolutely. That was always my format, what you just described, where when I would start lecturing to a group, I would only talk for 3 to 5 minutes, and then I would immediately open up everything for discussion and asking the audience for questions. And then I would be able to truly answer whatever their questions were. And this kept the program flowing much better, and it really engages the audience. They don't ever get bored.
That's so correct. And it's where we place those questions is quite important. So you mentioned then that 3 to 5 minutes of talking and then opening a question. That's a great way of doing things because you still need to earn people's trust and attention at the start of a presentation. We see lots of presentations that start with open questions. How's everyone doing today? What do you know about this? But the presenter hasn't yet earned the trust and intention of their audience yet and the ability to ask that question. So giving something first before you ask a question is an important principle. And if we can do that continually through the presentation to leave gaps of time to allow people to think and reflect, ask that question, it's really going to make that a much more interesting 30 minutes that you're talking to someone.
Absolutely. Kris, you absolutely have just nailed it. And just one thing I would add to that, when somebody is getting ready to go on stage or getting ready to do a presentation to a large or small group, remember that one phrase that I shared with you, it's showtime.
I'm going to start using that. So that's a great one. It's a switch in mindset, isn't it, that takes place? And for someone listening today as well, think about that. Maybe it's a chance to stop and repeat that and think about what that means. It's that switch that you take. The laptop is there. You've done the work. You've prepared. But that launch sequence of taking a moment of going, I'm on, it's showtime, creates that energy and really focuses you in on the task.
Absolutely.
Yes, Kris, this is all some extremely valuable information that many professionals out there certainly needs to take to heart. I certainly am going to be recommending your book to many of my colleagues and friends once it is published. We'll talk about that in just a second, but I have one final question for you as we get ready to close out, and that is, what would you like to say to all the aspiring and established business owners out there? So we're talking about those who are not business owners yet, but dream to be, as well as those who have been in business for many years and already have a good client base.
If we think about presentations, it can sometimes be a chink in the armor when we think about a business and a company that they might be focusing on a lot of different things at the time. But that moment they go and speak to people in a presentation is that moment of truth. If we think about the bar in most presentations failing, is focusing on that and letting that not to be a chink in the armor, but let that be a superpower. The enormous change that presentations can do and take place if you approach the task and get good at doing it, it can be transformational. We often hear in our world people bring up Steve Jobs as an example for presenting. Now, Steve ran a great company. He was a great communicator and he did the work in preparing for the presentations that he did, and he was able to create enormous change. Over the years in running training to workshops, I used to ask the question to people as a starting point saying, who can remember a presentation that they've been to and what stood out to it? And I'll ask that question to thousands and thousands of people. And what was really interesting is that 80 to 90% of people would struggle to try and recall a good presentation that they've been to. They could remember plenty of bad ones. And when it came to thinking about a good one, it wasn't always the world's best presenter presenting to it, but it was just better than everything else. It gave them something, and months and years later, they could still recall that. And everybody in business or thinking about presenting has the ability to be that person, to be able to cut through. And it's not overly complicated to get there because the bar isn't terribly high. So trying to think about transforming yourself as presentations being your superpower rather than a chink in the armor is a great way and a piece of advice that I'd have for everyone. Think about it. You don't need to be able to talk as a TED presenter or to 10,000 people, but just work on that process of continuous improvement and get good at presenting and enjoy the benefits that will take place. So that's more strategically how we approach it. And a lot of people come to us for presentation tips and advice. So on the tactical side of things, I'd say when it comes to presenting, if you've got something coming up in the short term, there's two things I'd probably say. One is think about telling stories. And we've covered off on assuming apathy and making things interesting. Think about the stories that you've got in your life, in your business, in the products and services that you interact with, and think about packaging those up as 2 to 3 key stories you can communicate with clients in your presentations. Stories are one of the easiest ways that we've got to immediately be able to be more engaging and make things interesting. And if you get good at narrowing down those 2 to 3 stories, you can repeat them over time and improve them. And it can just be something part of your presentation practice. Dealing with nerves, again, it's something that comes up quite a lot. One of the easiest things that can be done, and one of the best pieces of advice that we have, if you are feeling stuck, if you are at the start of a presentation, if things have gone wrong, if you maybe feel like you've started off on the path and you're off course, but you'd like to be on course, smile and breathe. Smiling and breathing is one of the easiest things that you can do to just take that control, reset your physiology, and build up that confidence again. So if it's at the start of the presentation or things are going your way, if there's nothing else that you remember from today and you ever feel stuck, stop, smile, and breathe. It's something that you can do that consistently works every time to be able to take control back, calm the nerves, and help you make an impact when you present.
Kris, I would like to add just one more statement to what you just said. It's when you reach that point in your presentation where there may be a pause or something, do everything that you just suggested. And one that I could add to that is look out into the audience, all of a sudden pick one person out and really zero in and look at them. And not only will you grab their attention, but also it helps you to recenter yourself, and then you can resume your presentation.
That's perfect, Swain. That's such a great piece of advice, because when we speak to a group of people, we can easily get caught up and forget that we're talking to other humans. And when you're facing a group of people in an audience, it can be a little bit intimidating. So that idea of focusing on one person, talking to them, making a connection with them really starts to build that sense of authenticity. And again, is going to help with your nerves and your confidence when it's presenting.
Absolutely. And also after the lecture, when that person that you really zeroed in on goes out to tell their story, they will always tell that story about the lecturer really acknowledging them and looking at them. They will never forget that.
That's fantastic. And it's often said a lot. People remember how you made them feel. And we're looking to create a feeling of connection and engagement. And so people will have some sort of an impact made on them, rather than the most common situation where people tend to zone out and immediately kind of forget or dump out of their brain of what they've just seen. That ability to do that can be done by anyone, whether it's at a senior role or a junior role, and you can start that with your next presentation.
Absolutely. Once again, it's showtime. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Swain. I love that.
I guess you could say that all those presentations that weren't very memorable, all those bad ones, they still had an impact. It just wasn't a positive impact. The impact on those people you were speaking to that day, Kris, was that those presentations failed to do their job. That was their impact. They weren't memorable, and not one person remembered anything about them other than that they hated them. To all of our listeners out there, if your business or profession requires you to make presentations on a regular basis, make sure you're going out there with all of this information in mind. Don't just try to wing it. Don't just content dump everything and rely on PowerPoint to do all the work for you, because guess what? It's not going to work. Remember that your presentation will either have a positive impact that'll have the audience wanting more, or the audience is going to be so bored with your presentation that they're not even going to remember it later, that it was just one of millions of boring, unmemorable, unengaging presentations that they just couldn't wait to leave, that they just couldn't wait for them to be over. So, Kris, thank you once again for sharing all this information with us. Can you please tell us, as we get ready to close out this episode, where people can buy your book and where they can find out more about the Presentation Design Company?
Absolutely. This has been so much fun today. Thanks, Swale and Christian. So the book is The Presentation Playbook, Win the War for Attention and Make an Impact. And that's available on Amazon for the physical copy and also for the Kindle version. For our business, we are presentationdesign.co. And if the idea of the launch sequence is interesting and people would like to find out more, we've got that as a free download on the website. So presentationdesign.co. Scroll down the bottom and you can immediately download a copy of the launch sequence and a series of other tips and ideas that we've got as a free download for people to start using straight away.
Thank you, Kris. I encourage encourage all of our listeners to go out there and check out your book, to go buy a copy of it, because I'm going to be blunt about this as well. If they don't read your book, chances are they're never going to get a presentation done the right way. Their presentation is destined for failure until they read your book.
That's very powerful. Thanks, Christian. And we're out in the world to try and sort of help people with the task. We work with clients day to day, and hopefully some of the ideas and the principles in the book will help people in the practice of the presentations and help them make a difference.
One thing I'd like to share with the audience before I leave is when you're listening to your client, truly listen. Listen to their needs, find out what they really want, and be able to solve their problems, because that's what will get you the job.
That is exactly right, Swale. It's important for all businesses, small or large, to always keep their clients' needs in mind. And that should be done with a tier 1 way of thinking. The client always comes first. The clients are your kings and queens, and they are to be treated as such. You are not to neglect them, especially if they're spending their hard-earned money at your company for your services and products. They deserve to be treated with the utmost respect and all their needs tended to in a timely manner. Don't neglect on that. There's 2 types of businesses out there. There are those who are just telling the public what they want them to hear just to land sales, aka lying and hard selling. And then there are those who are client-centric, make sure that all their needs are tended to and that they go by the book when it comes to serving them. Every single concern, every single requirement that the client has for their projects is taken care of, and in the end, you have exceeded their expectations.
That's such a great way to put it, Christian, and to condense that into that.
Yes, thank you, Kris. Thank you, Swale. I thank y'all both for joining me on BizCast today. This was a great episode, and I hope that all of our listeners out there are ready to make an impact on the world with their presentations. Like Swale said, it's showtime. Go out there and wow everybody. Thanks again, guys. Y'all have a great day, and I thank all of our listeners for listening to the CDG BizCast.